Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jim Akin, proud member of the class of North Catholic 1976, and we're in the home of Joe and Mary Jo Rabzinski in Glen Mills. Joe was gracious enough to present at the Father Guerin Networking Mentoring Breakfast back on October 20th, and unfortunately we had a mishap with the camera, so we're back. Joe was gracious enough to meet with us today to redo it. So we're going to learn more about his book, The Junior Varsity Team is Playing. I just wanted to introduce Joe through a little bio. Rabbi grew up in St. Anne's Parish in Philadelphia in the area of Aramingo and Lehigh Avenues. His house was right around the corner from the school and right up the street from the playground. That, combined with a loving family and good friends, was all that a young boy needed to grow up in Philadelphia in the 1960s. At age 10, he found a love for sports and basketball in particular. He went on to earn a full scholarship to play basketball at LaSalle College, now university. Upon graduation, he became a history teacher and basketball coach, where he taught and coached basketball for 40 years on a high school level. Joe also coached at women at the University of Delaware, and was the interim men's coach at Newman University, and dabbled with the professional league there, the basketball G League. He's been married to his wife, Mary Jo, for 40 years, and his father to daughters Beth and Lori, and son Joseph John, or JJ. Joe is the proud grandfather to granddaughters Bridget and Emily. In 1981, Joe returned to North Catholic, and in 1976 led the Falcons to a championship over the storied basketball program at Roman Catholic High School. Later on, he led Brandywine High School, Wilmington, Delaware, to a state championship. He was named Coach of the Year 8 times and is a member of 4 Hall of Fames. In 1968, he was the only member of both the varsity and JV teams representing North Catholic High School. At that time, North Catholic was the defending Philadelphia City champion in high school basketball. Special things happen in sports at all levels, and this is the story of one such event. It is the never-told inside story. I refer to it as a master class on the culture of the time of 2 high schools, North Catholic and Bishop McDevitt High Schools, and how fate altered their destinies. So I asked Joe to join us and give his story.
Thanks, Jim. I really appreciate the opportunity to get together with everybody, and welcome to our home. One of the questions that people ask all the time is, how did this book come about? And as somebody who was a member of both the JV and varsity basketball teams at North Catholic, I was the only one who really had the inside story of both teams. And it was a terrific event that happened when the junior varsity team was able to take the floor in the Plesser against Bishop McDevitt. But there's so much of a story and backdrop to it that over the years people continued to talk about it almost all the time. It seemed if I was at a gathering of basketball people, the topic would come up. One of the participants in the game was my next door neighbor, Joe Ivanisic, and so he and I would talk about it all the time, and other players would always bring it up. And then there were people who were in the neighborhood that I grew up in, St. Anne's and in the River Wards of Philadelphia, who would always broach the subject. So when I would talk about what happened, they had a different viewpoint. They never seemed to have the story that I experienced. So after retiring, I decided to write down my thoughts and write something that would be good enough for my family as a Christmas present. And when I gave it to my family, my 2 daughters approached me and said, "Dad, I think it's a little bit better than what you think, and maybe you should try to publish this." And so we were able to do that, and here we are a year and a half later. I took about 8 or 9 years of dabbling of putting it together with notes, and it was a hobby at one point, and then it turned into selling the book. The response has been fantastic. If anybody is interested, they could go to www.thejuniorvarsityteamisPlaying.com to get further information on it. But anybody who has used this book as a gift, the feedback has been very, very good. Everybody seems to have enjoyed giving a book to somebody deserving of a good read. Somebody who's important in your life, or somebody who's connected to life in a big city where the events take place, or if you're interested in the late 1900s where the events take place, people have enjoyed that as well. It's all mentioned in the book and all included in the book. And so I was able to move forward with it, and with the help of people like Frank Burns, who owns Burns Tavern, and a North Catholic graduate, and just a wonderful man, and does an awful lot for people, and anything that he can do for somebody he's willing to do to help. Some of my players and my coaches have been instrumental in the book's success. It's been read by over 5,000 people, and as I said before, the feedback has been very, very good. One of the players that was a big help to me was Mike McCarron. Some of you may remember him, and for those of you who are viewing me for the first time and don't know who he is, he was a former player of mine, and I always bring up the game where we were 5-6 and fighting for a playoff spot, and we were playing LaSalle High School, who was 11-0, and we were at home, and in that game we won 51-39. Mike had 39 points and 6 assists. He was 17 for 17 from the foul line. And so it was the first time I ever saw, and I've never seen it since, where somebody had a hand in every point scored. And it was just a terrific performance. To highlight how terrific it was, we were the home team, and LaSalle, who 11-0, brought about 500 or 600 fans to the game. When I took Mike out of the game to get a curtain call, they all stood up and gave him a standing ovation, which I thought was terrific. Dave Mastropietro's been a big help with the book as well. I have a story about him when we won the championship in 1987, defeating Roman Catholic. Dave, we were struggling early on. We were 2-6 and just couldn't seem to find our way. We had a very good year the year before, had high expectations, and just wasn't taking place. Unfortunately for one of our players, his father passed away, and the boy had come to practice and did not want to go home. He stayed on campus. And so Dave saw him wandering around and brought him to us, and we talked to him, and was able to get him home and visit with the family and so on. And we were able to set up a viewing that the whole team would go to the viewing for his father. So when we got there, we paid our respects, and I was the first one in line, and I left to go to the school van, and I was sitting there, and all of a sudden it's like 15-20 minutes and nobody is coming out. So I went back into the funeral parlor, and I tapped Dave on the shoulder, and I said, "Dave, everybody ready?" And he said in a very nice way, he said, "Coach, look around, there's nobody else here." So I sat right down, and we waited till the funeral parlor closed, and we went through the services the next day, and just seemed to bring us closer together. We turned into a very special group. We went undefeated the rest of the way and won the Catholic League Championship. But people like that are what make the differences are the difference in all success. And so I'm just proud to be connected with so many wonderful people. When I was a sophomore, I was trying out for the varsity at North Catholic, and you're talking about a school that had 3,800 boys at the time, and basketball was taking its turn as the dominant sport in the school because of a championship the previous year. And my goal was to be a starter as a sophomore. And we had about 600 kids try out for the team. I mean, literally, tryouts would take 3 weeks. And so when my goal was to be a starter, and I was on target to do that. And I remember how elated I was when my name was called out to be one of the starters. So things were going very well for me. And then over Thanksgiving holidays, you talk about the differences in times with this book. The clash between tradition and change that goes on and is included in the book is very, very interesting as well. And I ended up spraining my ankle because they had varnished the floor over the Thanksgiving holidays, and there still was a little bit sticky. And so one day I put my foot down and was trying to catch a long pass from one of my teammates, and my ankle stuck on the ground and the rest of my body twisted around. Back then, a little sympathy for you. Oh, you okay? All right, well, can you get off the court? We still want to continue with the scrimmage. And I remember limping home and going up and down the L steps. It was so very, very difficult for me. But pretty much my season was over. And that's when I went from becoming a starter on the varsity team to becoming a JV player and also suiting up for the varsity. And the ankle hurt all year. I was never able to perform the way I wanted to, but my love for the sport, and my passion for being included in the team, I wanted to be involved, and I wanted to do whatever I could to be involved. At the end of the year, the JV season was over. So ironic that usually a couple of the JV members are called upon to suit up for the varsity. And that year, no one was called up to suit up for the varsity. And there was a tradition that the varsity on the day of the playoffs would go to Mass and would go to breakfast and come back to school. And so we followed through with that tradition and ended up in a situation where the priest, Father Quinn, was late for Mass, and by the time that we got over to the Northeast Diner for breakfast, there was a shift change. Back in those days, breakfast was over and then they would get ready for lunch and that sort of thing. And we found ourselves waiting a long time for our breakfast. When we finally were able to get moving back to school, we stopped at one of the local stores in the corner that had the newspaper, and we wanted to pick up a newspaper it would have taken us maybe a minute to get back to school and have that paper with us because they had stories about the games that night. A student who was leaving early that day heard that there was no newspapers at the store. They were already sold out. So they asked us to go around the corner. He didn't ask us, or the one student mentioned to us, hey, if you go around the corner, there's another store, they might have the newspapers. And that's what we did. While there, we played a quick game of pinball and took up a little bit more time. And as we were walking across the street to the school, Mr. Friel came back around and hit the brakes with his car, and he jumped out. And he was always a very calm and poised individual and had a great heart. And so he said, get up against the wall. Where were you guys? You better be able to explain yourselves. And he said, don't go to sign in, go down to the locker room. And we went down to the locker room. And while we were there, one of the priests, Father Quayle, mentioned putting the JV team on the floor, as did the athletic director. And we were surprised at that. And so Mr. Friel came in. He asked what happened. We started talking to him. And we just didn't seem to register with him. But when he stopped us at the gate coming back into the school, and when even at that meeting, he never once mentioned suspension. We were to have a meeting with the principal at the end of the day. And what happens is he came in, and as I mentioned in the book, he had a piece of paper. It's the first time I remember somebody reading to me, an adult reading to me when they had something to say to me. So he said we were going to be suspended, and he was very, very angry and just went off to tell us not to come to the game. We was ashamed of us. The whole school's ashamed of us, and continued in that vein. So the JV team was able to take the floor. They were scrambling for, sneaks and basketball shoes because their season was over. They didn't expect to play. They went over to the Northeast Diner for a quick bite, and my next door neighbor, Joe Ivanisic, had said, hey, listen, make sure that you take advantage of this meal because this is the last time the Archdiocese is ever going to pay for you for anything. So, and it was a custom that we had at the time, always when we went there to the Palestra. We did not use a team bus. We would go by ourselves. We would get on the L and we would go into the Palestra ourselves. Sometimes people would meet up, and sometimes you would go with your family, sometimes you would go with your friends. But we all seemed to get there way before game time and be ready to play. Yes,
Yes.
Jim has a question.
Yeah, so, the interesting time, 1968, you could perhaps get away with that, whereby the players went down to the game on the L by themselves, which would not happen in today's...
And that's one of the things that points out in the book. I mean, I'm just scratching the surface with the book, but the contrast between then and now. People have read the book, and it's put them, if you're of a certain age, it's put them back to another time and brought back a lot of good memories. Younger people who have read the book said to me that they learned a lot. They didn't realize some of the things that had gone on, not only in the school, but in the culture of the times, in the history of the times. The clash between tradition and change, the women's movement, minority rights, and everybody being able to speak to the traditions of the time as to whether they were the correct traditions. Should we maintain those traditions, or we are ready to change for the better? So I think that's one of the things that comes through, along with the experience of big cities and what it's like to be in a big city. I mean, Philadelphia is the setting, but it could be Boston, it could be New York, it could be Chicago, and just change the names and it would be the same thing. And the book is about achievement and accomplishment when you're talking about all the teams involved and the people involved. Our coach, Jack Friel, as I said, a wonderful man, and somebody who was in a really tough spot as a disciplinarian and a basketball coach, the varsity basketball coach. He and the administration had a difficult decision to make. When Father Corcoran read the statement to us, it was very clear that he said, it is the decision of the principal, and he stopped, the administration, and he stopped, and the basketball coach. Almost as if it was an afterthought for the basketball coach. Yet, he had his duty to perform. He was the basketball coach. He was the disciplinarian. And as I've said to a few people, I find it curious that he wasn't, I think he would have liked to have been in the room, but I find it curious that he was not in the room because he was a disciplinarian and he was the basketball coach. And here, the basketball coach, the basketball team was being disciplined. So I think he was in a very difficult spot. I have great respect for the man, as so does everybody else. And when he went in onto the floor at the Palestra, he was booed unmercifully because everybody had come to see the varsity. And the game itself took on a whole different dimension. I've been able to be in contact with players in that game from Bishop McDevitt, and wonderful guys, turned into wonderful men. And they did everything right that season. They were able to be better than they thought they were going to be. It was the first time they were going to be in the playoffs in the Palestra. They were very excited. They were primed for their best effort of the season. I mean, they did have 3 Division I players, and Bobby Haas and Jimmy Sullivan and Bobby Kelly, and they had played us really tough at home the second time we played them, and they were primed in their minds for victory. Now, whether they would have won or not, I don't know, had they played the varsity. But when they heard that the varsity was not playing, it was like the air being let out of a balloon, and it put them in a very difficult situation. Still, a JV team takes the floor, and their vision was greater than their circumstances. They should have been scared. They should have played tentatively, and yet they played as if they belonged on the varsity level all season long. Part of the reason for that is many of those players turned into great varsity and college players. Four of those players went on to Division I schools. One went on to play at Delaware Valley College, which is a great school and has a great athletic program. So many swirling emotions that were going on and taking place. And I think if anybody reads this book, if you are a parent, if you're a teacher, if you're a coach, or if you're a leader at all, I think this will help you to be one step ahead. I think you'll be able to look at everything that happened and the unfolding of events, and you'll be able to learn from it, and you'll be a better parent, a better teacher, a better coach, or a better leader, because you'll be able to anticipate things a little bit better than you were before.
That's great. Joe, when you spoke at the Union League, one of your teammates was there, Jim Boylan.
Yes.
And a question was posed to Jim that day of how did what were you feeling? What were you going through? And Jim answered something like, well, I was 15 years old and we were just reacting to the circumstances. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is that the JV team had not practiced for a full week.
Well, actually, they had scrimmaged us on Thursday.
Okay.
So that their last day was Friday. And so Saturday we had and Sunday we actually had practice just with the varsity alone. So it was 3 days where they did not practice. And that would add to the mix of them walking into that situation. Jim Boylan is a fantastic person. He's somebody who had a tremendous impact in that game. For people who know Jim, he's 6'6" and 250, and at the time, and wide-shouldered, and just was a massive person, and with a heart of gold, and always had that and still does. I'm really honored to be his friend. I go to the parties at his house, and I can't wait for the next one. They're just he and his wife Rose are just wonderful people. And it's no surprise that he was such a success that given day and going forward with his life. Mike Kaiser and Iggy Brodzinski, Joe Ivanisic, Billy Dever rounded out the starting lineup. Billy Dever tells a story about how he was one of those kids who halfway ran home and ran into the house and was getting stuff together, and his mother was saying, well, where are you going? He said, I'm playing in the plus strip tonight. And they couldn't understand what was going on. And then he did what people do, or what we were expected to do. We got on the bus, he got on the L, and then went to the game. Mike Kaiser had a terrific game, got a scholarship out of it. The coach of Loyola Baltimore was there, and he saw him that day and came back the next year and followed up and recruited Mike and gave him a scholarship. Iggy Brodzinski played at Drexel and played a terrific game. The rebounding figures were tremendous. When I talked to some of the players of McDevitt, I talked to some of the people who know the McDevitt team. Their coach was a terrific coach and did a great job, as did his staff. But on that given day, I think everybody was taken aback by the events. And so all year long they had played man-to-man. And about 2 or 3 minutes into the game, they picked up full court man-to-man and stayed a man-to-man. And they fell back into a zone, which they very rarely played or practiced. And the idea was not to give up so many rebounds, because there were a lot of rebounds to be had on the part of the JV team because they missed so many shots. But North Catholic was able to get a lot of them because of their talent and ability, but also because the McDevitt players were not familiar with their slides and the way that they felt comfortable in their defensive end of the floor. And they never really came out of it. I should also add that Billy Dever shredded their press. It sounds like a harsh word, but it's the most accurate word. I mean, he just took the ball and just dribbled right through the press. A lot of times back then, people would look to pass through the press. Billy could just take the ball and bounce the ball about a half inch off the ground, about 100 miles an hour, and he was just able to get the ball up court, get off a quick shot. If he had a wide open layup, he would make it. If not, he probably would miss it, but then the rebounding impact came into play. Just a tremendous effort by the JV team, and a wonderful accomplishment by them, and also credit to Fran Doherty, who was the JV coach. And I would imagine that if he wanted to be 16-0 or 22-0, he may have been able to do that, but everybody played every game for about 3 quarters, and then in the 4th quarter, whoever he thought was playing the best would play that game, play that quarter. So we had a 500 record as a JV team. But practicing against the varsity the way they did, the JV players were practicing against a very talented team. Magnus Minkowski went on to Villanova, was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the 2nd round. Joe DeMuro was a terrific player. Jimmy Yasmin and Steve Paskovich were a very good backcourt. And Mark Williams was probably the most underrated great player who ever played for North Catholic, and was a very, very good team. It was a team that very easily could have won the championship.
Yeah. What's your sense, what's your feedback that you've received over the years from the varsity that didn't play in the game?
Yes. Yeah, I think there's a divide. For the sophomores and juniors, we had more time. The juniors had another year. Myself as a sophomore, I had 2 more years. And North Catholic basketball and the coaching staff was great to me, and I'm really fortunate. I was the first person from both sides of my family to go on to college and graduate from college. And I don't know if that would have happened had it not been for basketball and for North Catholic. But the seniors were upset, and some of them are still upset today. And I say that upon talking to them. Some have come to a point where they realize it's 50 years ago, but that's where they do stand. Because, and I understand where they're coming from, the passion for playing basketball at North Catholic and being able to be a high school player in the city of Philadelphia was so very special. And I've made this comment before to different people at different gatherings, but if you were a senior and you were going to be playing in the Palestra at that given time, at age 17 or perhaps 18, it was the same impact that it had on your wedding day, or maybe even your firstborn. It was so passionate and so emotional, and that the abrupt end of it, the abruptness of it, I think was one thing. But I also think that there wasn't clarity in the story that that was told by the varsity, or told about the varsity. They said at first it was cutting classes, but the truth of the matter is we were sent off campus, and then it was discipline reasons. And so yes, we did take our time and walk around the corner, and it did take an extra 7 or 8 minutes. And North Catholic was a strict school, and discipline was part of the Catholic school system, not only in Philadelphia, but New York, Boston, everywhere. And so I understand that, but the story was never told. And so, when we talk about it, we think that would have alleviated some of the response of some of the seniors who are angry today, even today. In fact, they have told me that they're not 100% in agreement with the book, but they're glad that our story has been told. And that's really was my purpose in the whole book, the whole journey, was to tell a story that was never told before. And we were able to do it.
What has been of the faculty who are still with us, have you, since you've written a book, what type of feedback, interaction have you had with some of the faculty who were teaching there at the time and know the story very well.
Yeah.
Taught the team.
Yeah. I've talked with Fran Doherty, and Fran had read the book beforehand to proofread it, as did 12 or 13 other people. Looked at the book to try to give me some insight, to try to help me along with it. And, Fran was surprised that I was writing a book. I don't know if Fran held me in the same regard as a student as he did as a player. But I think he thought it was a good thing that the story was told. Fran's a tremendous person. I think he's the kind of, you hear people say, well, this guy will do anything for you. Well, when you say Fran Doherty, that's true. It's not just somebody trying to pay him a compliment, it's true. And he and Jack Friel were great friends, and I can see that because they're both great people. Tony Constantino was my freshman coach, a man I respect, and he has the winningest record in school history. And I was together with him at a function, and he had some questions about the book, and but he also congratulated me on writing the book, and he understood that it was part of the basketball history of Philadelphia. Really, it's part of the basketball history of Philadelphia, and not everybody realizes this, but when this event took place, it was national news. And some people say even international news because it made the Stars and Stripes in Vietnam. Bill Travers did not teach at North Catholic at that time. Did a tremendous job as a teacher and football coach at North Catholic and at Bishop Egan and at North Penn, and as a guidance counselor at North Penn. And he gave me favorable reviews about the book as well. He actually came the next year. Quick story. We were in the Plester in the championship game my senior year. Actually, it was 2 years later Bill came. And Bill had been hired as a football coach, and he had been coming along the side court of the Palestra during the game, and he had a soda in his hand. Fran Doherty was my senior year coach, and Fran, stood up to put his hands out to say something, and he knocked the soda out of Bill's hands, and it went all over. We had to stop the game. It went all over the place. But those are the three people who were connected to the school that I have come in contact with, and that was the feedback I received from them.
The day you spoke at the Union League, Ernie Kosnick was there, longtime teacher, disciplinarian at North Catholic, and a great person. Did he have any feedback or insights?
Yes. So Ernie's in a different category because he's so special.
Yes.
He and I talked on the phone a few times. I was actually in the company of Fran Doherty and Tony Constantino and Bill Travers a few times. But Ernie, thought that it was a good book and that was something that needed to be told to everybody, that the varsity side of the story was told, and also that the JV team, it highlighted their accomplishments and their achievements as well. And it also, I think, the fact that it shined a light on a lot of the good things about North Catholic. So many of us have great memories about North Catholic, but not all of us do. Some people don't have good memories of it. But I think that the book does shine a good light on North Catholic. And I say North Catholic, but you could plug in Father Judge or Cardinal O'Hara or Bishop McDevitt and just think of the names of people that were involved in the basketball programs in your school at that time or even later. And I think you can enjoy it and relate to it even more.
Going back and reading the book, I mean, I read it twice, and it's kind of interesting where you're reading it and you know everyone in the book, and
Yep.
That's just fascinating. I even gave a copy to my mom, who's 91, and she read it in 2 days, and she was right there. I mean, my two older brothers were they were North Catholic students, were at the game, and so we were, certainly a North Catholic family. The one thing that jumped out at me was that before each game you would say the rosary.
Yeah. When Jack Friel was the coach, he was a great example to all of us. As I said, he was somebody who was poised, somebody who was always calm. He would use his words to be able to get through to people. He wasn't one to pull rank a whole lot, wasn't one to raise his voice. And one of the things was that I remember about him was his deep faith. And he manifested that or exemplified that, not only in some of his daily actions, but that was one of the things we did. We said the rosary before the games. And he was a very devout man, a very pious man. He was a great father. He would bring his kids to practice on Saturdays from time to time, and being a good example as a father at that time and always. There's a little section in the book with some questions and answers in there, and I remember when I was first starting as a coach, and I was struggling, and I was just trying to figure out who I was as a coach, and certainly I came from a great background of St. Anne's North Catholic in LaSalle, and was an assistant coach of Father Judge's first championship team with Bill Fox, the greatest high school coach of his generation. And certainly I knew basketball, but teaching basketball and getting your point across to people is a skill and or art that takes time to develop. And I stopped by the restaurant where Jack Friel worked, and he was the manager. And so he said, "Hey, sit down, we'll talk a little bit later on." And I thought maybe it might be putting me off a little bit. And then he said, "Yeah, step in my office." And we went into his office, and he was on the phone for about an hour and a half. And he would listen to me in between phone calls. And I thought, he's busy, I understand, but at least he's, giving me a chance to vent or to talk to him and so on. And then he finally hung up, and he had ordered me a steak dinner actually 2 steak dinners from the chef, and the food came, and then he began to answer all my points. Things that I thought that he wasn't even hearing, he was able to either have a pretty good filing system or note-taking system or just a good enough memory to put in the back of his head. And we talked well until about 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and it was a great help to me as at that time I think a 24-year-old coach in my second year of coaching, my first year as a head varsity coach, and it was a great help to me.
That's great, thank you. Just to firm things up a little bit, so Father Garin was the vice principal, I believe, during the time.
I think he was the studies director.
Yeah, and then when I was there, he was the principal, North Catholic, and then went up to DeSales University, was the treasurer, and then became the development director for the Oblates, and started these prefaces. So for 35 years or so, he's had some really interesting guest speakers, and obviously your talk, you brought in the largest attendance we've ever had. So,
well, I'm glad I was able to do that, and I think, I know you said you were bringing in 40 or 45, and I think the final tally was 77 at that day.
yes.
And that has been the best part of the whole experience, with the book, is that I have been able to connect and reconnect with so many former friends and teammates and coaches. I've gotten together with people that I haven't seen in 25, 30 years. People would come to a book signing, and they would, buy a book, and they'd say, "Hey, Joe, so-and-so from first grade." "Oh my God," and then we would, make arrangements to get together, or former coaches, with the same approach. And I know how busy people are to stop and take note of say, a book or me, and everybody has their own lives going on. And it just meant so much to me that people would stop what they were doing and make time to come to a book signing, or they could contact me through the website and start a conversation and go back and forth, and then arrange to get together, get our wives together, get groups of people together. That has been such a great sense of renewal for me. And people like George Raveling, contacted me about the book, and all the local college coaches, the wonderful Fran Dunphy and Jay Wright and Billy Lang and Phil Martelli and Ashley Howard, and Sonny Hill. So many wonderful people that are prominent. Herb McGee, prominent in the basketball community today. Took time to say, "Hey, good job," and it really was able to even add a piece to the already fantastic basketball history of Philadelphia.
Oh, that's great. That's a neat story.
Yeah.
That's really wonderful to hear. Joe, as we wrap up, I just a quick commercial to thank our sponsor for the breakfast was Tim Nolan and Kathleen Nolan.
Wonderful. Thank you to them.
Sales grads.
Yeah.
And Tim's a Ryan grad, good friend of mine. And to continue with Father Garen's legacy and all he did for so many people for so many years is that we have a dinner dance coming up on January 11th at the Union League. And that helps really to help the priest and brother Oblates who were so instrumental in our lives.
For sure.
And so it's a fundraiser for that event, and we'd like to get as many people to attend as possible. So that's Saturday night, January 11th. So
right. And again, if I can make a shameless throw in here, the junior varsity team is playing, www.thejuniorvarsityteamisplaying.com. And thanks very much for the opportunity, not only to speak at the Philadelphia Union League, but also to take the time to get together with me here and welcome everybody to our home. And I know we're closing up now, and if you have any questions, please contact me. I'd be glad to speak with you.
great.
Take care.
Thank you so much, Joe.
All right.